Hello, Guitar Smarts fans. Before you check out this podcast, I want to make you aware of a cool new place where you can interact with other Guitar Smarts listeners. It's a Facebook group called the Guitar Geek Hangout. That's where we hang out and talk about all things guitar. So, if you like the Guitar Smarts podcast, come and chat with Kiran and myself over in the Guitar Geek Hangout on Facebook. Maybe check out some pre-podcast clips and even get involved in asking and answering lots of questions from the other page dwellers. Hope to see you there. Greetings! Welcome to the first episode of the Guitar Smarts podcast. We are Matt and Kiran. We've been friends for many years. We are both what I would call working class guitarists. So we have normal day jobs, but we've spent many years gigging in wedding bands, function bands, pub and club bands, and we still love to play live. And this podcast is about analysing our experiences, our desires as your average gigging musician, geeking out on the music tech, talking about our favourite music, artists and gigs. We want to invite some guests onto the podcast in the future also, so keep your eyes peeled for some upcoming guest interviews. This is a podcast made by guitarists for guitarists and the gigging musician. Professionals, amateurs, beginners, all are welcome here. We're on social media too, so come and join our communities on Facebook and Instagram. For more information, give us a like, say hello, tell us what you think of the podcast, give us some ideas for show topics in the future as well. We're kicking off episode number 1 with a brief introduction about ourselves, and then we're going to spend some time discussing one of our favourite topics, cheap gear. Never has there been a better time to get quality instruments, amps and other gear for such an inexpensive cost, and we talk about our experience with cheap gear and some of our favourite items. Remember, if you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast in your preferred podcast app so you don't miss a show. Anyway, let's get to it. Well, let's make a start.
All right, mate.
Let's introduce ourselves, I guess, for the first time.
Yeah. So we should give an intro of who we are, shouldn't we? And
yes.
why we like talking about guitars all the time.
Who are we?
So, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I'll make a start. So I'm Matt. And I've made a note here to specifically say that I'm a non-professional guitarist, not an amateur guitarist. I think there's a distinction between the two. I'm a non-professional guitarist. I've been playing for about 25 years, and I'd never really had a real intention to be a professional guitarist anyway. There was a period of time in my 20s when I thought, I'm going to go and study music and become a professional guitarist, but I realised it wasn't for me. I didn't want to do it. I enjoyed it too much to want to make a job out of it, So that's, I've been playing for about 25 years. What inspired me to play? So the first thing I saw, which fascinated me about a guitar, was in my dad's record collection. He had the Eric Clapton Slow Hand album, which it's just a picture of Blackie, the Strat, And I thought, that looks incredibly cool. What is it? It's a guitar. And then that was around the time that Unplugged came out. So Clapton Unplugged and then From the Cradle were the two albums that made me want to play guitar. And that says a lot about my inspiration, I guess, as a guitarist, and what kind of, how I like to play and what are things I reference when I'm thinking about playing guitar. But since then, 25 years later, my my influences are much more eclectic than that. I love a lot of different types of music, a lot of different styles, genres, ages, old and new. And I guess this, for me, is about having those conversations about music and about guitars and about equipment and everything that you want to geek about and talk about. And that's me, I guess.
I'm going to ask you more about that in a minute.
Yeah, you should.
I think you're being modest. You've been very modest, and having played and gigged with you for a number of years, there's a lot more underneath that modest statement that you said. And I know, having spent many a year gigging with you, but then also chatting to you, as we set up or between sets and things, that this is a real passion for you, and your knowledge of the subject is great, and you've got a really nicely rounded view of what it means to be a performing musician, as well as a good sensibility and very good technical knowledge about gear and things, and we're going to get into all of that at some point for sure. I mean, for me, yeah, similar, right? So I've been playing for 25, 26 years. And I think it started for me as something where at school you had to pick an instrument. And so for me, that one seemed to be the coolest. So I just chose it on that ground, and nothing else. And then realized quite quickly that it was going to take some effort and some hard work to try and play the kind of things that I'd grown up listening to. Right, my house was filled with music growing up from my parents. Although this wasn't the reason that I wanted to play guitar, it was just I had to pick an instrument. It wasn't until later years that I developed my own music taste. But and then I think after I've been playing for a couple of years and had some kind of basic classical guitar training, I put down the guitar for a little bit, and it wasn't until my early teenage years when I think the whole grunge scene started to hit, and Metallica's Black Album, of all things, came out, that I was kind of inspired to pick the instrument up again and start to see if I could play some of it. And I remember sitting down with the tab book. So this is pre-YouTube, this is pre-internet. I think I might have had a copy of it on CD, but it might have been on tape. And in any case, I remember sitting down with this nylon string classical and spending months basically learning Metallica's Black Album from a tab book and with a hi-fi on a nylon string classical guitar. And that kind of, for me, showed me that this was something that I was really into, because trying to do that was quite hard work.
Yeah.
And then it just went from there. After that, I was hooked. I was addicted, and I started to develop my own music taste and get into different guitar heroes and people's style that I liked. And then I think that background of growing up in a house filled with music and my dad's taste of Hendrix and Clapton and Queen and all of that started to Santana. My dad's a huge Santana fan. That started to kind of play a role in what I started to get into on guitar. I worked in guitar shops growing up. Soon after that, I started to get into the real geeky side of it. And that's where my love of kind of repairing, setting up, and trying to understand the technical side of how a guitar's put together and how it functions kind of came about, is working in guitar shops and spending time with guitar techs and watching these. It was one particular individual who owned this music shop who really schooled me in that, and then got into gigging and it's something that is a huge part of my life and a passionate part of my life, and it's wonderful to be able to in now adult years have that ability to go out and play when we can, and also collect gear and keep learning about it. That's the thing, that there's so much to learn in terms of gear technology, music theory, setting up instruments and collecting them. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
Yeah. There's always something shiny and new, isn't there?
Oh, there always is. There always is. There always is.
Cool.
So we thought today it would be a good chance to sit down and focus on one particular topic, which I know we speak a lot about as well, which is how to get really great sound from sometimes really affordable gear. And it's the title of what we've tried to talk about today is what is the best cheap gear that we own. Do you want to kick us off as to where we want to start? How do we want to start talking about this? Do we want to talk about guitars? Do we want to talk about amps, pedals?
The whole thing, I think, because it's a fun subject, definitely, because especially now, right, there's so much stuff out there that is really affordable, that is really worth a look. And we've said before how, like, when I was starting out on guitar, it was difficult to kind of find affordable equipment, that was good. I started off on, so the first thing I'm going to mention is the Yamaha Pacifica. That was the first, it wasn't my first electric guitar, but it was the first electric guitar I had that really, for me, felt like something different to what I'd had previously. My first guitar that I learned on was like a £30 Argos or Index, I think it was. I don't know if you remember Index. Index was like Argos. Yeah, you remember Index? It was like £30 classical acoustic that came with steel strings. And after my second guitar lesson, the neck on it collapsed forward. And my guitar teacher at the time, who was a really good tech, his name was Chris Sagerson. He fixed it and put nylon strings on it and glued it and clamped it, and he gave it back to me in my next lesson. And that's still at my mum and dad's house now, 20 odd years later. I can still play it. Still got the original strings on it. But that was an awful instrument, but it was enough for me to learn for the first, I'd say, 3 to 6 months. And then I got like this Charvette electric guitar, which is a classic instrument now, but it was like cheap electric. He recommended I got it. He saw secondhand in this Manchester guitar shop. And then a couple of years later, I traded it in and bought a new Yamaha Pacifica with a maple neck, actually. And I had that for years. I gigged with that as well for years. I refinished it a couple of times, did all kinds of messing around with it.
Didn't it have that natural kind of finish on it? Did all the Pacificas have like a natural almost oiled or wax kind of
that's
finish?
Right. And it did originally have that. And then in the mid-90s, Clapton brought out this live video of him gigging at Hyde Park. He was playing his Clapton signature Strat, but it was the first time he had it in this like Mercedes blue colour.
Nice.
Really nice colour. And I tried to refinish my Pacifica a similar colour. I didn't do a great job of it. But it was fun to do it. So that was the first time I'd ever taken a guitar apart, kind of.
Your first mod? Was that your first mod?
My first ever mod, yeah.
So I remember when the Pacifica came out. And I think that was, at least in the UK, and, the age you would have been, kind of early teenage years, maybe. I think that was quite a defining moment. And I remember when the Pacifica came onto the market, because I think it was the first time where people recognized that you could make a really, really good electric guitar at an affordable price. Because prior to that, there wasn't a huge amount of was it sub 200 quid when it came out?
It was sub 200. I think I paid something like £179 from memory. Something like that. Yeah, it was definitely sub 200.
Which was unheard of at the time for a good playing instrument. At the time, for us growing up, if we wanted, you could get your Fender Strats, and there was probably Mexican versions or equivalent cheaper versions to the American standard kicking around, and there was certainly the Epiphone Les Pauls and things, which were probably back then going for 300-400 quid at least, but they were considered really decent guitars. And growing up at that time, you couldn't afford a Gibson, even though the Gibson Les Pauls back then, the American ones, I think the classics were going for like sub £1,000 back then. And the standards were probably just a smidge over $1,000. But when that Pacifica came out, that kind of opened up, the electric guitar to a different, budget range for people, because it was almost unheard of to get such a good electric guitar. So I think Yamaha nailed it at that point and really showed.
It was a great guitar.
It was. All the guitar mags went crazy for it. I played at the school we had. I think the school bought a couple of them, and they were kicking around in the music room, and they were brilliant. Really great guitars. Really great guitars.
Well, the thing is, you kind of. I bought it because I could afford it. It was something new that was more like a normal Strat, because the guitar I had at the time, that Charvette, was more like a super Strat. It had 2 pickups, single coil in the neck, humbucker at the bridge. It had a Floyd Rose, like a crackle finish. It was a mad-looking guitar. It was really great to learn on because it was easy to play. But I wanted something more traditional. I'd been playing for a couple of years. I was getting pretty good at that age, probably about 14. So I'd saved up a little bit of money, like pocket money, and I sold that Charvel to a mate of my brother's, actually, who was, playing guitar at the time and was into kind of heavy metal and stuff. He loved it. He gave me like 100 quid for it. And and then I got this Pacifica, and it was a step up for me. It felt like a step up. But going back to, why why is that still a relevant guitar? And I'd have another one of those now. It's still a good guitar because it does represent good value for money to have guitars like that, to get, to buy instruments that are sub 200 quid now because they're so well made. They're still really good from a learner's point of view. But I think it's still a relevant instrument to have in your arsenal, even if you're an experienced guitarist. There's still a quality instrument, well made, good sound. And it's the kind of thing I would say is good if you're a gigging guitarist, gigging on a weekly basis. That's a good guitar to have as a backup. If you're at a gig and you've got your Fender Strat as your first guitar and you want to take something with you as a backup, a Pacifica's an ideal guitar for that. So that's that's my starting point for kind of a discussion point around good value instruments or good value kit. Yamaha Pacifica's been around for 20 odd years and it's still one of the best value guitars you can get, I think, outside of the.
So what happened to your one? Did you keep it? Have you've still got it somewhere, or you sold it?
Do you know what? I can't remember.
Wow. So it could be at your parents' house somewhere.
It might be in the loft. It might be in the loft.
Wow.
I haven't played it for a long time. But that is, that was a really great guitar. So sorry to interrupt this super interesting conversation. However, if you've made it this far, you should probably subscribe to the Guitar Smarts podcast. You can do that in your favourite podcast app. Go and do that now, and then come back to the show. Let's get back to it. I guess now, if you're kind of playing guitar, there's a lot of information about all the other things, effects and amps, multi-effects pedals, all kinds of accessories and kits and things like that. I kind of feel a little bit lucky that I grew up at a time, playing guitar at a time where you could only really get all that information through magazines. So you're kind of spoon-fed. Now I can go and read 2-3 years worth of magazines information in 1 minute, on Music Radar or some other website. Yeah. So you're kind of bombarded, I guess, with all these options if you're just learning and starting out now. As back then, I went through the whole stage of learning and getting pretty good at guitar before I realised there were so many options for other things you can get, like effects pedals and amps and stuff like that.
I relate to what you're saying, actually, because there's massive advantages of having the accessibility to kind of YouTube and online resources now, and how technology and the affordability of that technology has moved on. But I relate exactly to what you're saying. I found it quite a nice way to be able to incrementally build my knowledge back then, because multi-effects pedals and things like that were only in their infancy, really. The touring guys had the big kind of rack mount things and Oasis quadriverbs and stuff like that. But again, that wasn't really practical for a young kid gigging in a band. But then the pedals started to come out, but multi-effects units from the likes of Zoom and Boss and companies like that started to come out, and it was a nice kind of introduction to start accessing all of this stuff. I can imagine now if you're setting out, it must be quite daunting, the plethora of technology, pedals, guitars, amps available to kind of go, where do I even begin? We didn't have as much choice or variety within certain price brackets when we were starting out. So you kind of nicely built it in an incremental way that then made sense. At least that's how I feel about it. Yeah. Maybe it was a slower rate of progression. Maybe people starting out today, have an accelerated way of learning all of this technology and gear because, there's so much available now. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, funny enough, I didn't even have a guitar amp until I first started gigging. And Roadrunner, the band that we used to be in, that was my first ever gig. I'd been playing guitar for probably a good 15 years at that point, and I'd never really been in anything more than a bedroom guitarist up at that point, even after studying. Even when I was studying music for a few years, I was playing live with students, but I was never in a band. And whenever we were playing live with students, we were using like the college's equipment,
Got you.
for amps and stuff. So I grew up with I had a little 10-watt practice amp when I was starting, and then after a couple of years, not long after I'd got the Yamaha Pacifica, I got this Korg multi-FX unit. And that was what I played through for forever, And then when I got the gig with Roadrunner, I bought and this is the second kind of budget bit of kit that for me was amazing. I got this Tech 21 trademark 60 amplifier, which was a transistor amplifier. Not an expensive bit of kit at all. It was 60 watt, perfectly giggable, 2-channel, kind of had like a vintage voiced channel that was more cleany, kind of Fendery, and then a more British voiced higher gain channel. I just used the Fendery kind of channel the whole time, and that was my gigging amp for years. Nothing else, and it sounded fantastic. It was a really great, it's very kind of, traditional valve kind of sounding, but it wasn't a valve amp. It was super reliable, super lightweight, and that was a really great amplifier. And I was gigging with an Epiphone Les Paul, and that I was gigging with a sub £500 rig, for years, and loved it.
I was amazed really that Tech 21 wasn't a valve amp when I first heard it. It really was, a great sounding amp. For not for a solid state amp, just full stop. It was a great sounding amp and really good piece of kit.
Well, Tech 21 were renowned and still are, I guess, for the kind of preamp technology. A lot of bassists and a lot of studios still use a lot of Tech 21 equipment for their preamps and DIs and things like that, and they were really, really great on that area of technology of solid state. Preamplification technology. So that the trademark series, I think, was one of the first forays into the guitar amplification market where they applied the knowledge in preamp technology, and man, really worked. And I had that amp for a long time. It's not so long ago that I traded in, actually. Only 3 or 4 years ago, I think. I traded it in, maybe even less. For another cheap amp. I've always bought cheap stuff. I've never had anything expensive, really. For a mixture of not having the resources to, not wanting to go into debt, and not being able to justify. I mean, I've never been a professional guitarist, so in my mind, I've always been, how can I justify spending so much money on something that for me is almost gratuitous in that sense? If it to me is just I know it's silly, I should treat myself from time to time, but still, I've always kind of thought I'm a little bit tight, but also I can't, if I can't justify it, what can I justify? And then, actually now, as we've discussed before, the options in the kind of the budget market are so great anyway. Yeah. I've always been kind of like, well, I could have for the cost of an expensive thing, I can have 3 or 4 budget things and still really enjoy them.
I would love to hear you play through a really expensive rig.
So would I.
Because I've only ever heard you play through modest stuff, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. You're an incredible player. You've had you've worked on your chops, and you've got great natural feel, and you play really well. But for me, it embodies that thing that I always talk about, which is if you've practiced hard and you've got good musical sensibility about you, you can sound good on even modest gear, right? It doesn't have to cost a fortune. I've seen plenty of players over the years who have got the opposite, which is they've got phenomenal gear, really expensive stuff, but not necessarily the feel, or haven't invested enough in their practicing or playing to get to the standard that you are, right? And that's fine. They're on their own kind of musical journey as well. But I wonder what you would sound like through like a 10 grand rig. And you know what my hypothesis is. I'm not sure you would sound or make any more of an impact than you do on your modest gear, because it's an attitude, and it's a knowledge to make more inexpensive gear sound good by dialing it in correctly, by spending time figuring out how to utilize what you've got, the tone knobs on your guitar, the volume knobs on your guitar, what an amp can do, what it can't do, and dialing it in, and then using it to the best of its ability. Whereas I've been guilty of this as myself, buying really expensive gear, but then just kind of expecting it to do everything for you rather than investing the time to actually dial it in and make it work, to its full effect.
Whereas I've kind of felt I've been a little bit forced down that path by not having the resources to get everything that I would have liked. So you do learn to kind of manipulate more what you have. And that develops your touch and your feel as a player. That develops your sensibilities. I think there's a lot to be said for having, racks and shelves and things full of equipment and all kinds of kit, and knowing that at your fingertips you've got all these different sounds and tools. But that, I don't think that necessarily helps a guitarist that's learning to develop the feel and touch and the abilities to kind of extend their own capabilities rather than to rely on the sounds of other things, other tools. But I guess there's some guitarists that have made a career out of that, thinking of Edge from U2, whose sound is almost entirely, based on, I'm sure some people would argue it isn't, but his sound is almost entirely based on, the interaction between what he plays and the delay effects that he uses to create, these patterns and things like that. But
which is an art form in itself,
cool,
right? And it's a style of playing in itself. But for me, I was never somebody that was massively into huge amount of effects. I, for a period in my teenage years and through the grunge kind of phase, yes, there was certain little effects that I liked, but mostly it was me going out with a modestly priced Marshall, a Les Paul, and a wah pedal. And some reverb, and that was enough to play in the kind of rock bands that I was in. In later years, as I started to get more into blues and more into clean tones, and then experimenting with single coil guitars and more latterly into valve amps and things like that. That's been a lot of fun as well. But for many years gigging, it was a very simple setup and not an expensive setup, and just figuring out how to get the best out of it, and making cheap gear work for you. So I think the kind of the lesson is that you can always aspire and buy more gear and save up for the expensive stuff, and it's lovely to own and it's lovely to play, but don't be put off by trying to make cheap gear work for you, because I've got some cheap stuff in my rig now, which is brilliant, and I don't keep it because I'm afraid to spend the money on the more expensive stuff. I keep it because it's really good and I really like the sound of it, and I don't feel I need to buy the more expensive version or anything different.
And I'm also kind of I think I'm part of me is glad that I'm not spoiled by it, like having something really expensive that this is the the best it can be. If I had a really expensive £2,000-4,000 guitar that was just perfect, then I worry that anything less than that would feel, wouldn't feel good to play anymore. Whereas, now, the guitars I have are pretty much the most expensive guitars I've ever owned, and they're all, 500 quid guitars. And I don't feel like when I play them that I'm missing out on something. I don't feel like I'm missing out on a better quality instrument because I'm not spoiled by something. And I also don't feel like when I've gigged, anybody's ever gone, well, great guitarist, but should have a better guitar. Nobody's ever thought that, except maybe other guitarists who are snobs about this kind of thing. I think cheap gear, affordable gear, is perfectly usable, giggable in professional situations even.
Absolutely. It's about the sound that comes out of it. I mean, I have got some of those really expensive guitars, a few of them, and they are lovely to play and they do sound really nice. But I think for me, they can often be a distraction as well to what you're trying to do with your playing, because you end up spending more time thinking about the guitar that you're playing and kind of analysing it and or even worrying about it in terms of, you know, taking it out and gigging it, that it serves as a distraction. Maybe that's just because I'm not wealthy enough to not care. But it's like I've saved up for these and I've bought them, so now I'm worried about, you know, damaging or losing them or just, you know, getting distracted by the thing itself when I'm playing it. Whereas the cheaper stuff or mid-range stuff, we keep using the word cheap, and the word in itself actually is almost is a bit insulting, isn't it? Because it kind of implies,
I think, is better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Inexpensive, I think, is the word, because you know, I think for, you know, £300-400, there's some brilliant guitars out there, and I play and own some of those, and do so on a regular basis. And I've also got some guitars that are like sub £300. Which I love playing, and they're great. They're really good fun. And so let's do some more examples. So let me give you an example. What is one that I've bought? So I wanted to get a guitar with the kind of PRS style scale length on it, just to experiment with that. And I bought from Thomann this PRS style guitar, this double cutaway thing. I don't think there's any way to get around the fact that it's basically been designed to be a complete knockoff of a PRS SE or Custom 24 or whatever you want to call it. It looks identical, right? And it cost, I think, including delivery, 180 quid or something silly.
It's madness, isn't it? It's madness.
It's a brilliant guitar. It is really, really good. Honestly, I was surprised at how good it is in terms of the overall build quality and finishing of it, and how fun it is to play. It needed a decent setup, for sure. But after I'd done that, it's a really great guitar that I would have no issue about taking out to a jam night or having as a second guitar at a gig. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Go on.
If you were to look really, really closely at it, what would you criticise?
Okay, that's a good question. So, plenty of things, right? If I look at it with a critical eye, to compare it to a real PRS, because that's probably how I would look to critique it. If I didn't know what it was based on, I wouldn't have as much points to critique it on, right? So if I look at it, first thing you notice is that it's tried to replicate those really heavily flamed maple tops that you see on PRS. That PRS are famed for, that are beautiful bits of wood, and they just pop. This one, it looks like an approximation of that. It's not quite got that premium finish, but then again, it was 180 quid guitar, so I'm amazed that it looks as good as it does, considering the price point. So, if I was critical about it, you know, I was amazed that the fret ends were so smooth and well finished when I got it. I was expecting to have to kind of, you know, sort all of that out, but it was fine. I was expecting that the electronics on it would be really ropey and the pickups would be cheap and not great sounding. They're not. They're airy. They're nice. I don't think it coil splits as well as a real PRS. The single coil tones on it are good, but they're not amazing. It's okay. It's passable. But again, a bit of you know, some new pickups and some upgraded wiring could solve that. It is a budget guitar, and there's no getting around that. But I think it's a budget guitar that you would put at a price point of around £300 to £400, not 180 quid. So I think, you know, if I was being really critical about it, I would say you can see where the money has been saved to bring it in at that price point. It could have a better set of machine heads on it. It could have a nicer nut on it than the plastic nut that it does have. It's got a Wilkinson trem on it, which is actually a really decent piece of hardware. It's set up really nicely.
That's about half the buy price there, isn't it?
Do you know what I mean? It's a really nice.
Trems aren't cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, they're used in a lot of high-end guitars.
Exactly, and the pickups. Even what I've said about how they split when you tap into them with the push pull stuff. They're still really decent. They're not muddy. They're not lacking kind of dynamic kind of feel when you play them. It's really good. Honestly, at the price that it is, I struggle to critique it. If I'm honest,
I think the key thing there is that the guitar that it's emulating is an order of magnitude more expensive, right? But is it an order of magnitude less of a guitar than
exactly?
And it isn't, is it? And I think that's the other thing when we talk about kind of value or inexpensive equipment is it's not just the fact that it's more attainable, but you do get diminishing returns the more you spend. I think there's some bits of kit that are they're clearly the reason they're so expensive, the reason they cost so much is clear, and there's nothing like them. You think about things like Dumble amplifiers or certain vintage things that are just unattainable. Clearly, you can't compare some things with not everything's apples for apples, but that's the key thing for me with inexpensive equipment is you get a vibe of something for such a fraction of the cost, and sometimes that vibe is enough to to kind of satisfy what you want, really, isn't it? It's you want to, like you said, if you wanted a PRS style guitar, you don't have to go out and spend the proper PRS guitars start at about 1,800 quid anyway, I think.
Yeah.
Below that it's the S2 series or the SE series, and even the SE series is kind of top end Epiphone money.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. What about things like amps and pedals? Are you in this? Have you kind of dabbled with the inexpensive stuff there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever owned really expensive amps or pedals in any case. I mean, my main gigging amp now is a 40 watt Fender Blues Deluxe, which I've had modded with upgraded speakers, upgraded speaker, because the stock Eminence speaker that it comes with was very, very brittle, very harsh. So I've replaced it with a Cannabis Rex speaker, which is rounded out, giving it much more warmth and low end punch, and taken off that harshness. And it's got upgraded and rebiased valves in it, and that's a brilliant amp. But that's sub 1,000 quid. Yeah, even after the mods that I've done to it, it's probably an 800-900 quid amp, and I love it. It does everything I need it to. I've got a little kind of mod that I've plugged into it as well that allows me to kind of add a master volume to it, so I can play it, so I can push the front end of it quite hard, but then not have ear-piercing volumes, for home use or even kind of rehearsal use and stuff like that. So that's not an expensive amp in any case, but I would say it's not a cheap amp at the best part of a grand. And pedals, I mean, I've got some, I've got a Ibanez Tube Screamer 808. I've got Rat pedals and a bunch of Boss stuff. Some nice. I've got a few nice pedals as well. MXR pedals, Love pedals. That are more expensive. 100 quid to 200 quid pedals. But I've also got a bunch of really cheap pedals. And I think pedals is an area to really experiment with, and that whole pedal market at the moment is exploding massively in terms of like clones or of different more expensive boutique pedals, and they're getting so close to the original thing where you just go, wow, it's
it's that philosophy again, isn't it, of that PRS style guitar you've got. It's got you a vibe of something. It's a lot more expensive, and I think that's the same with pedals. You can buy stuff that is. I mean, I'm a big fan of TC Electronic stuff of their pedals, because they do some really good stuff, and obviously they're a very well-renowned company that does some fantastic effects. But other than, in fact, on my board at the moment, I've got the orange Terra Stamp amplifier, which I think sounds great, but the main reason I got it is because it's small and lightweight, and I don't have to carry a heavy amp around. But everything else, I've only got 3 pedals on my board other than that, and it's a Ditto looper, TC Electronic.
That's a great pedal.
I've got the Spark Mini Boost, which is just a single knob boost pedal. That was only that was sub 50 quid. And the thing I love about it is, one, it's a really great clean boost pedal. There's loads of gain in it, so really easy to push front end of an amp. But the other cool thing about it is it's got this momentary thing. So if I click it on, obviously, like any other pedal, it stays on. You click it off and it goes off. But if you hold it down for more than a second, the boost comes on, but then it goes off as soon as you've taken your foot off the pedal again. So if you're playing like I do quite a lot, I have done over the last few years, is where I'm the only guitarist in a band, and you need every so often to just have a quick lift and to drop back down again. I don't need to stamp twice. I can just rest on the pedal, get a quick boost, and then take my foot off it. And that's a really cool feature.
Johnny Be Good is the real song that requires that if you're playing it as one guitarist in a band where you're holding the rhythm section down, but every now and again you want to punctuate those kind of little Chuck Berry licks through it to just cut through the mix. That's a really cool.
Just need to lean on it and then lean off of it. You don't need to keep click, click,
that's
click,
great.
That is a really cool little feature that's in a pedal that I think now retails for about 39 quid.
Which pedal's that again?
It's the TC Electronic, I think it's the Mini Spark Boost. So they do a Spark Boost, which is like it's got a full 3-band EQ on it, as well as different voicing switches, and even that one's still pretty cheap, sub 100 quid retail, I think. And the Spark Mini Boost is, the classic mini pedal sizes that you get.
Yes, I've got a few there.
It's well worth the money. I mean, I think if you're in the market for just a cheap boost pedal, just to give yourself a volume boost either into an amp or out of another pedal, it's a no-brainer for me, because it's just really simple to use. And the other thing I've got is, because that orange amp doesn't have reverb, I've just got a TC Electronic Sky Surfer reverb, which is just like a spring, hall, or a plate reverb pedal, and that's from the Smorgasbord range of pedals, which is I think they're all sub 50 quid. But they've got everything. There's different fuzzes, you've got different delays, analog delays, digital delays, there's reverbs, shimmer reverbs, phasers, choruses, and they all sound superb. And I was thinking that if you were kind of like if you were a gigging guitarist, but maybe, kind of like I've been in the past, where you're still amateur really, it's not my day job, it's never been my day job to be a guitarist. I've just done some wedding gigs and some pub gigs and stuff, and I needed a particular sound. I'd never go out and buy, like a £200 boutique pedal to get a particular sound. I'd go to that TC Electronic range and find the closest thing for 20 or 30 quid, and they're built so well. They're in proper steel cases or aluminium cases, and some really nice design features, like all the connections are on the top, so you can get pedals closer together. So if you want to get more pedals on your board, it's easier because the connections are on the top rather than the sides.
That's a good
so you don't
idea.
lose a lot of floor space to your jack connectivity between pedals. They're really well designed pedals. They're based on classic sounds as well, so they're quite upfront about, hey, this pedal's based on a Tube Screamer type sound, or this one's based on a classic kind of Dimension chorus from the 80s. They're not kind of hiding that they're taking inspiration from other things, but that helps set an expectation for what you're going to get, I think. And it's not a big investment to say, well, even if it's just for one gig, this couple, they want their first dance to be this song, and it's really important that song has a chorus guitar part, and I don't have a chorus pedal. Well, I'm not going to go out and buy some boutique thing. I'm just going to spend 30 quid on a TC Electronic smorgasbord chorus. And you know what? For one song, everyone's going to be happy. Nobody's going to be looking at me going, "Hey, why haven't you got like an original Boss C1 on your board?"
Oh God, no one apart from the uber geek guitarist is going to know that. I mean, you do love a minimal board, I must say. I'm not a huge user of like loads of effects at one time, but I like a little bit more options on my board. So I, as a standard on my board, I will always have a wah pedal and tuner. I will always have a chorus and delay as standard. Most of the amps that I've used over the years have got reverb built in, but I have just put a small little mini reverb pedal on my board just to experiment with that as well. That would probably go in and off the board depending on how I feel. But chorus, delay, a wah pedal and a tuner will always be there. And then it will be, then what I'll rotate out and mess around with is the different drive pedals and kind of experiment there with different combinations, different kind of gain stacking of drive pedals. Oh, and a boost pedal as well. I do have a boost pedal that I use to boost for solos and things like that, which sits kind of towards the end of the signal chain as well. So I'll always, that for me gives me a lot of versatility to be able to play most function band or pub band kind of sets and approximate those sounds. There's anything weird and wonderful like phasers or kind of flanges and things like that, then yes, I would be in that situation where I'd be like, right, if there's a particular song, then I might just need to either pull out a multi-effects unit or buy a cheap pedal just to get through that gig.
Exactly. Something more utilitarian that's there to serve a purpose rather than because you're inspired by its sound or whether it's the best of a particular thing. Do I need a flange? Well, what's the best out there? I'll go and try a load of different. For me, it's more about, I've always been more about the general vibe that something brings, it's more about a connection you make with the sound that you have and how you want that to kind of influence your playing at the time, like a wah pedal. I don't have to have a vintage wah pedal. If I have something, I still want to play Voodoo Child and or maybe some funk stuff. It's going to make me feel like I'm in that kind of vibe. The more kind of sprinkles of things, it's more for me about the guitar and the amp, and the pedals are just something in between that help facilitate other places you want to get to. They're not so important to me. And I think even if I could afford more expensive guitars, more expensive amplifiers, I still don't think I would spend more money on pedals. I'd still go for, budget things or cheaper things.
I agree with you.
I think
the diminishing returns thing is definitely the threshold for that is a lot lower with pedals, right? Because I think that the cheaper, more affordable pedals that are coming out that are trying to emulate or approximate or be clones of the expensive boutique pedals are getting so close now that especially in a live setting, in a mix with a band, it's some of them you wouldn't. It's definitely not, in my opinion, worth spending the extra £200-300 unless you have idolized that pedal and you have to own it. Here's a question for you. Where would you, so we're talking about cheap gear and we're talking about, or what we said was inexpensive gear. Where would you spend more of your money on your experience? So would you put more into, if you had like $1,000 to spend on getting a setup rig to get you out and gigging, where would you put more of it into? Would you put it into the guitar? Would you put it into the amp? Or would you use that equally across guitar, amp, and pedals? What do you think makes the biggest difference?
Amp, definitely.
I agree with you.
I definitely think the amp. I think you can, given the quality of what you can get in a guitar these days, you can spend. I'd probably go and spend like £300 on a guitar, 600 quid on the amp, and a couple of cheap pedals. Like I said, that TC Electronic range for 100 quid you could probably get 3 or 4 pedals. But the amp is so important, I think, because that reacts, to your playing so much. And a good amp is better sounding, but less forgiving on your playing. And I think if you're developing as a guitarist and you want to get better, the two things you need more than any piece of equipment is, one, to play with other people, because nothing develops your playing like playing with other people. And two is an amplifier that's revealing of your playing. Something that really makes you hear what it is you sound like and what it is you need to work on. Because a cheap amplifier will still... I mean, I have a cheap amp. That orange stamp was 150 quid, but I'm past the point of worrying about, whether an amp is going to help me get better as a guitarist. I just want something that's lightweight and sounds decent enough for my ears, and that really does. But if I had a grand to buy everything I needed, I'd spend the majority of it on an amplifier, I think. And that's coming from the viewpoint of a developing guitarist, I think. What about you? Same question.
I agree with you, but it's taken me a long time to get to that realization. I always thought it would be about the guitar, and I thought, and I think a lot of beginners may fall into this kind of trap, or even more, experienced players, that and there's a logic to it, right? Because the guitar is what you're physically holding, it's what you connect with, it's generating the signal that goes into the amp, and therefore, if the guitar sounds good, then the amp is just going to replicate that. So let's spend more money on the guitar. And I think now where guitar manufacturing is, the availability of really well-made instruments, in the £300 to £400 price range, and the fact that you can do inexpensive mods to, a budget guitar platform of 300 to 400 quid, put in a set of, inexpensive but really great sounding iron gear pickups, which will run you like 35 quid a pickup, but sound incredible, or change the machine heads on it, or just get it set up so it plays in a way that doesn't limit or fight against you, and is a joy to play. I think you can achieve that really easily as a beginner guitarist for 400 quid and have something that you will cherish and love, and can continue to tweak and mod, and save up for the really expensive dream guitar if you want, that costs £2,000. But beyond that point, it's definitely kind of diminishing returns. I think the amp, having played a lot of solid state amps over the years, a lot of Marshall stuff, then experimenting with what those amps actually do and how it changes the way you play, I think it makes a much bigger difference, and it also makes a difference as to when you, exactly to your point, when you put it in a band context and want to try and cut through and sit well in a mix and be sympathetic to the rest of the band sound. I think the amp has a much greater ability to give you that tone and give you the feedback as a guitarist that you want, that encourages you to play. So one amp that springs to mind for me is the Blues Junior. I that was a revelation point for me when somebody loaned me like a Mark II Blues Junior and said, try this, you sound good, but you've never really played valve amps before. It's all been solid state or modeled like line 6 stuff through a PA or through just like a power amp. And I spent like a weekend with this Mark II Blues Junior, and it just blew my mind. I mean, it's 15 watts, right? But definitely, plenty of power to it. And it transformed the sound of so many of my guitars that went through it. They came to life in a different way.
I know some guys like our mutual friend Connor, who's a professional guitarist, has done some serious gigs and has a lot of expensive guitar equipment. When he's out doing his pro gigs, he's playing through custom made Cornell amplifiers that he's had made, and Cornell's made stuff for Clapton. I know he's got vintage Gibson guitar, he's got vintage Fender guitars, he's got a lot of expensive stuff. He obviously, it matters to him. But when I've gigged with him on like wedding gigs and stuff like that and functions, he rocks up with a Blues Junior, and a couple of pedals, and he understands, that not only is it a reliable amp, but it really is a great sounding amplifier. It's not just something within a product range. It's not just something that Fender have built to satisfy an area of the market. It's a really good quality instrument.
Absolutely,
really good choice.
It's a great pedal platform.
Yes, absolutely great pedal platform.
Which is good. Not all amps take pedals really well, but a lot of the Fender stuff, like the Blues Junior, it really does. And it's lightweight. You can always mic it up if you need more volume from it.
They are louder than the size of it would suggest.
For sure. You go 15 watts. But do you know what? I think fashions have definitely changed in the last couple of years around guitar amp wattage as the determinant of whether it's any good or not, right?
Yeah.
Of course. And I've been guilty of this as well, carrying around a 4x12 and 100-watt heads, right? Because I'm gigging now, and I'm gigging to more than 10 people, so that's clearly what I need. It's a 4x12 and a half stack. That's what any gigging guitarist worth his salt, it should be playing with, and it's absolute nonsense, right? And certainly Valve 100-watt heads. They were designed for stadiums when you needed to get over the sound of the crowd, and yes, they were mic'd up and things, but you needed that kind of volume on stage to be able to hear yourself before in-ear monitoring or foldback monitoring was around. Nowadays, it's not fashionable, I don't think, to have those really heavily rated high wattage amps anymore for most people's purposes. Just mic it up.
Well, going back to our going back to Connor's experience of playing, some big stages, is that he can't hear himself anyway. Most professional gigs now, they're on silent stages, so that his amplifier has to be run really low volume. Everything's going through his in-ears. Some guys, that's why these Kempers, Axe FX, people like that, that's why they've really taken off with a lot of pro guitarists. It's not necessarily because they sound so good, which they do. A lot of people will say they're not a substitute for the real thing, but what they give them is the ability to satisfy that silent stage requirement that a lot of venues have now, a lot of sound engineers really like, and still get top quality sound of a cranked amp in their in-ears, and they barely care about the front of the house. What they care about is something that sounds real in their ears, and it means that sounds consistent from stage to stage as well. One guitar amp will sound really great at one venue, and you go to the next venue and actually you think, I just can't get it to sound right because the room's affecting it too much. Whereas something like a Kemper, you're not impacted by the room. So,
but that's an expensive piece of kit, right? The Kemper. That's a
few grams worth of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a pro musician's tool, which is definitely gaining a name for itself. But I would say, if someone's wondering and struggling around, is it justifiable to spend £500-600 on a Blues Junior when it's a 15-watt rated Valve amp with a single? I don't know what it is. Is it a 12-inch speaker?
12-inch, the 12-inch.
I would say it is worth it.
I think so too.
That will stand you the test of time for many sessions and gigging situations, and mic it up if you need more volume. It's a great piece of kit.
Cool. Well, let's wrap up. So it's fun playing with cheaper kit, I think. Sure. I think that's one of the key things for me is I don't have to worry about, and we spoke about this before, expensive stuff means something different to you, I think. It would mean something different to me other than just an instrument. It would represent something else. But, cheap gear is so accessible, and for any guitar that you see online that you think is desirable, you can find something cheap that gets you in the ballpark as well. So I think that's the most important thing for me about cheap kit is the accessibility of it. And it means that you can always kind of emulate something you want to emulate without having to invest so much into it, whether it's in amps, pedals, guitars, whatever it is. You don't have to, be a snob about it. You don't have to, just because somebody you like has a proper Gibson standard or, a Marshall stack or whatever it is. And, you don't have to have that if you want to be emulating that sound or that person or that feeling. That's what I love the most about inexpensive kit, is it's accessible. And it brings something to you that, you don't have to pay thousands for,
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think also what it allows you to do is spend time focusing on the playing rather than thinking about, this £200 pedal that you've bought, £300 pedal that you've bought, or this $4,000 guitar. It allows you to just plug in, utilize what you've got to the best of its extent, recognize that it's not, supposed to be the nirvana of everything and solve all of your problems. It's a cheap piece of kit or an inexpensive piece of kit to get you closer to what you're trying to do. We're all going to spend our lives as guitarists searching for the perfect tone, whether you've got, $500,000 in the bank account to spend on it or 500 quid. You will always be looking for improvements and tweaks. So what better place than to start with some inexpensive gear that can get you some really great tones, and then find out and experiment with that to develop what it is you're really after before you then start to invest in the mega bucks of stuff that you then kind of feel that you're kind of stuck with to some extent. So there's something in that as well.
That's my philosophy. I think it's it's cool actually to have cheap stuff.
I do.
I think it's like a finger in the face to people who think it's important to have expensive stuff, and and it's not. It just isn't. So if you're listening to this, you don't have to go out and spend £2,000 on that Gibson. Go and buy 10 Harley Bentons instead. Mod them all, play with them all, throw them around, enjoy them.
Yeah, have fun with them. Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Matt. I agree. I think this is probably a part one. I think we could do a part two on this.
I think this could do a part two as well.
I've got so many pedals that I want to talk to people about, that if they're thinking about spending mega bucks like I did on some of my pedals, only to then realize that it doesn't really work for you in a live situation or with other pedals that you're running into it. I found pedals that are just amazingly inexpensive but have delivered the goods, so we could probably run a whole session on.
We should definitely do that. We should do that next, and I have more questions for you on kind of guitar technicalities, setup things and stuff like that.
Okay, cool.
I've recently just restrung my Les Paul, which hasn't been strung for a while. I took strings this will make you laugh. I took the strings off of it. All the ball ends in the old strings were stuck inside the the tailpiece. Yeah. And I couldn't find my snips, and I was like, I'll just get around to it another time. And it's been like that for months. And I just this weekend put a set of nines on it for the first time.
Wow! On a Les Paul.
On a Les Paul, and it feels good. I've had to adjust the height of the saddles a bit because I think with not having it attached, I think they've just kind of lost the right height. So I've got them all right. Nothing's choking out. Feels great with nines. Cool. Really does feel snappier, almost. A little bit funkier even. And actually, it's adding a little bit of brightness that I think a Les Paul misses in certain situations. So it's great. We'll talk about that next time. Anyway,
we'll talk about that.
String gauges, more guitar setup stuff, and pedals.
Absolutely.
Let's do that.
Sounds great.
Awesome, dude.
Look, great to chat to you today, as always, Matt. And have a good rest of your week. And look forward to speaking to you more next week about all this.
Definitely, looking forward to it. Cool. All right, buddy. I'll speak to you soon.
Take care.
All the best, Kiran. Ta-da, mate.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. It's been a real pleasure doing this podcast for you. Remember to come and subscribe on your favourite podcast app so that you never miss a podcast in the future from Guitar Smart. And come and join us on our social media pages too. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And you can contact us there as well if you want to give us some feedback, some ideas for conversations, or tell us about your experiences too. Take care, everyone.